Hello and welcome back. I know last time we said we'd go on to Dark Souls 3, but as it turns out, there were a couple things in this I wanted to show off before we moved on to that game. And this has been kind of difficult to keep interesting. One reason for that is that playing these games while talking about them in depth is a challenge in and of itself. The other is that I don't know everything yet. What item is it? Lost Soul. Does it mean anything? I can't really tell you. It's sort of like you are an anti-abyss spreading, making order out of the chaos. You don't pick where you spread, you just go, and there's a lot of parts of these games that haven't had that spread. And finally, Dark Souls 1 is the most abstract of the series. It and 2 are difficult to interpret of them in and of themselves, and they become more interesting once you start comparing them to later games, because the later games fill in a lot. They have more details, and those details help make the story work as it goes. But today is a part that I'm actually pretty excited about, because we get something from Dark Souls 1 that works in and of itself, the storylines of Solaire and Siegmeyer. And let's talk to Solaire.
Ah, hello. You don't look hollow, far from it. I am Solaire of Astora, an adherent of the Lord of Sunlight. Now that I am undead, I have come to this great land, the birthplace of Lord Gwyn, to seek my very own son. You find that strange? Well, you should. No need to hide your reaction. I get that look all the time. Oh, aha. So I didn't scare you. I have a proposition, if you have a moment. The way I see it, our fates appear to be intertwined. In a land brimming with hollows, could that really be mere chance? So what do you say? Why not help one another on this lonely journey? This pleases me greatly. Well then, take this. We are amidst strange beings in a strange land. The flow of time itself is convoluted, with heroes centuries old phasing in and out. The very fabric wavers, and relations shift and obscure. There's no telling how much longer your world and mine will remain in contact. But use this to summon one another as spirits, cross the gaps between the worlds, and engage in jolly cooperation. Of course, we are not the only ones engaged in this, but I am a warrior of the sun. Spot my summon signature easily by its brilliant aura. If you miss it, you must be blind.
Is there any more?
Oh, hello there. I will stay behind to gaze at the sun. The sun is a wondrous body, like a magnificent father. If only I could be so grossly incandescent.
So Solaire and Siegmeyer both utilize a sort of mythology that they're referring to in their quest lines. For Solaire, it's essentially a grail quest. He is after the sun. It is his sole obsession. There's a sort of divine order to why he's after it. We'll get to Siegmeyer later, but I've come to interpret the two as, and this is going to sound crazy, they are a comparison between two friendly and lovable, but ultimately failed management styles. Solaire is always willing to help you. He is extremely outgoing, and he has a very definitive goal that he knows and is working towards. He is the only one in really Dark Souls 1 and 2 who has a clear sense of purpose, and that makes him stand out. It makes him as one of the characters that people most identify with. But his storyline is tragic, and it's tragic for two different reasons. First of all, he's not good at asking other people for help. But second, and more important right now, is that he's obsessed with the sun, and it leads him to one of his fates, one of them that is generally considered pretty bad, although maybe it's not quite as bad as we thought, but it's an obsession that becomes dangerous, and no one, because he can't ask for any help, no one is there to redirect him. You kind of have to intercede to prevent that ending from occurring. And how to do that is incredibly arcane and not something that anyone would naturally figure out on their first playthrough. Maybe someone, but that's like monkey with a typewriter, right? So let's talk about what obsession means in the terms of the Dark Souls series. And to do that, we introduce one of the most important lore elements for interpretation that I think a lot of people overlook, and that is interviews with the developers themselves. So let me get my notes ready. We're gonna move over to the display. As Miyazaki, he came on to Dark Souls and Demon Souls originally from a different part of the department, and he talks about why he came over. Demon Souls wasn't doing well, he says. The project had problems and the team had been unable to create a compelling prototype. But when I heard it was a fantasy action role-playing game, I was excited. I figured if I could find a way to take control of the game, I could turn it into anything I wanted. Best of all, if my ideas failed, nobody would care. It was already a failure. So, think about how things must have been at FromSoft during that period. You have the project that would eventually become Demon Souls. It is a joint development. The publisher is funding it, Sony. It's a big title for you. It's maybe a potential breakout title, and it's not going well. In fact, Demon Souls, the game that they eventually released, was described by the Sony, one of the Sony officials in charge of determining whether or not they would continue to publish it. For my personal experience with Demon Souls, when it was close to final, I spent close to 2 hours playing it, and after 2 hours, I was still standing at the beginning of the game. I said, "This is crap. This is an unbelievably bad game," so I put it aside. Sony eventually decided not to publish Demon Souls outside of Japan. It was picked up by another publisher, and its cult success led to Bandai Namco being the publisher for the Dark Souls series. But think about that. You had gone through this process that was miserable. You managed to finally get something workable, and the person in charge of continuing your funding, his sentiment is that this is crap. I think that informs the depression you enter into when you come to Firelink Shrine, and it's parallel in Dark Souls 2. The crestfallen warrior has this idea that he has these tasks before them, and they're hopeless, they're pointless. Moving along, we then have this sentiment from the Dark Souls 1 interview, talking about the painted world, in fact. Miyazaki says, "Thank you. I'm very happy with the area overall. It was the important first map, and I think I was able to incorporate the new ideas I had while not taking anything away from the original design of the area. When collaborating with the team, I often come up with ideas, and I enjoy trying to fit them in as we develop the world. Of course, I have to be careful not to break anything. I think this method of continuous improvement can really help add to the atmosphere of the area. In fact, we also used this method on our last game I worked on, Demon Souls. The problem is that there's a tendency to overproduce things, and before you know it, the project can spiral out of control and work can slow down." My interpretation is Miyazaki came onto this project feeling like Solaire. He was excited. He wanted to chase after his son. And then what he learned in Demon Souls is that if you chase after your perfect son, sometimes it leads you to dark places. Sometimes you overproduce. Sometimes the project spirals out of control. The sense of a grail quest that can turn on you. Now, this might seem still a bit of a stretch. Let's move on and look at another area described, the one we just went through, Undeadburg. Moving on to the Undeadburg, we never really spent much time working on the look of the area. It was the first map we created, and the large bridge, the church, and other structures were already planned out by the 3D artist who was in charge of the area. As the lead artist on the project, he had already decided exactly how he wanted these things to look, right down to the smallest detail, even the levers and statues. So, to me, this strikes an interesting parallel to the previous one because they call both of these the first map. Here we have Painted World being a first map, the important one that Miyazaki is very excited about. And we have Undeadburg being the first map, one that they never really spent much time working on, one that was designed entirely by a 3D artist who they don't mention. There's not a lot of detail there. There's a sort of comparative indifference to it. My belief is that Undeadburg was something that they inherited from the project prior to Demon's Souls, from that failed prototype, and they found a way to make it function within a later game. And not only sort of from a practical, technological programming and design perspective, but also from a story perspective. I want to jump ahead a little bit. We're going to move on to Dark Souls 2. Because there's a parallel in Dark Souls 2 with the Forest of the Fallen Giants. In fact, it's very much explicitly made clear in the first sentence. Much like the Undeadburg in the last game, the Forest of the Fallen Giants was an area primarily designed by the 3D artists. Again, some nameless artist was responsible. It was another map that was created extremely early on in development, and it has a number of typical Dark Souls shortcuts. Again, created extremely early in development, such that it could be called maybe the first. At least the first Dark Souls 2 map that was completed. It's really a map where the map designers were able to fit in everything they wanted to. Concentrating purely on the aesthetics, you have the withered sleeping giants scattered throughout the area, and evidence of the ancient conflict is all around you. In the original design, the giants were actually much larger. They would tower over the castle walls and attack the player as you progress through the area. Gradually, you would draw closer to the sea where you would find the defenses constructed to stop their advance. The concept that it was a series of defenses made to fight against the giants never changed, so most of the area actually survived the redesign untouched. I think it's fun to look at the place and imagine what kind of battles were fought there. Of course, you get a glimpse of the scale of them within the dreams as they hurl those colossal fireballs about. So, there's two parts of this that really stand out to me. First, they talk about how there's evidence of the ancient conflict all around you. There's no demonstration of the ancient conflict. And then second, they talk about how it's fun to look at the place and imagine what kind of battles were fought there. This again speaks to me as a map that was designed for a previous project and then repurposed into a later game. And some people might call that, lazy design. I actually find it quite fascinating in sort of a way comparable to how Final Fantasy XIV was turned around from a disaster to a pretty successful MMO that has held on to number 2 for quite a while. We have a sentiment that there was a concept of giants attacking a castle, and we might suggest that part of the failure of Demon's Souls, the prototype prior to Demon's Souls, in fact, is that they couldn't execute their technological vision. That this map was never realized, and that all you can do now is imagine what battles would have been fought there. That previous history of the game that they couldn't tell is now part of this world, but it's told in a shadow, in seeing the remnants of the story that they never were able to tell. And this idea, I think, changes utterly the way I see the games. Think about it, like, the project prior to Demon's Souls was described by Miyazaki as being first person at times, specifically a game in which you switch between first and third person perspectives. That is a huge change from what we have in Dark Souls. There was something tumultuous behind this series that I think the developers can't talk about, but they can hint at. So with all that in mind, let's go back to Undeadburg. Let's in fact go back to the place that we just fought Taurus Demon. We have a bit of a walk, but this is, I think, necessary. These ramparts here, the ones that you fight the Taurus demon on, strike me as somewhere that is reminiscent of the Forest of the Fallen Giants. In fact, if there was a giant attacking you, his handholds would possibly be here and here. These indentations where something happened, right? I would imagine that if this area were designed for a fight like that, it might play out similar to old Iron King from Dark Souls 2. Jumping ahead, for those not familiar, we'll get there. Or Bed of Chaos in Dark Souls 1. That this area was meant to be something else, and that will never happen. Also, the idea of walking along these paths while a giant swipes at you is a design that gets repeated both in 2 areas in Dark Souls 3. Again, jumping ahead, we'll get there for people who haven't played it, but for who have played it, Cathedral of the Deep is one of them, with all the giants that you can interact with, and the other area being the giants being held in the profaned capital. So moving back, we have Solaire's position. An interesting one. He will at some point leave this space, and he has a choice. He has a path ahead, and the path to the side, and a door that is locked. So I kind of imagine as being a big choosing moment in Solaire's journey. Does he go back and does he face demons? Or does he move ahead and chase? Hopefully I survive this. It'll be rather embarrassing if I don't. Dragons. Well, that went about as well as one could hope. I don't remember this game very well, I'm sorry. And by avoiding the dragon, we can get our shortcut back to that bonfire. We can spend our souls, we can get our health back, and we have another path available once we're done. But up here you have a choice between facing a dragon and facing the demons. The dragon is killable right now. We're not going to do that. As some of you know, the dragon can also have its tail removed, and when you do that, you gain a specific sword, very strong sword earlier on. We're also not going to do that. But this motif of a dragon just guarding something and breathing fire is something that gets repeated in Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3, so it's something to keep in mind. And what I know, and I'm going to spoil for you, is that the dragon, if I recall correctly, is guarding the sunlight altar that is related to what Solaire is after, that is part of the Solaire Covenant. It is something that I don't have a full answer for, but these are design choices to keep in mind. As you will be told, the flow of space in these games is very convoluted. We have leveling up, which is boring. I don't really care. I don't have great things to spend faith on at the moment. You get one a little later, so we'll give a little bit of faith, but I think I will spend most of it in vitality and endurance. This is, again, not an especially min-maxed playthrough. I don't particularly care about the gameplay elements. I hope that I don't back myself into somewhere where I have a bad build for parts that I don't remember very well, but we'll see how that goes. I am traditionally not a magic user in these games. I kind of find it a typically boring playstyle, but in a lot of other respects, the series is about getting out of your comfort zone, so we press on as this faithful cleric. Now, when we're trying to get past the dragon, and we're going to bypass the dragon, once again, we return to the aqueduct motif. The dragon can't find us here, and we can sneak into the city by walking on the aqueduct. I'm really bad at getting backstabs in this game. It's kind of sad. It's never been a game I found very intuitive physically. Oh, Jesus. I don't really want to get poisoned. That would be inconvenient. Could have gone much worse. Again, we have an area that looks like it might have been meant for water. There is a grate, or water could have come out. But all we have are poisonous rats and a dragon yelling above us. Moving on, we climb up this area into the proper Undead Parish. We have a choice that we are going to not use. I want to explore what's up there later on in more of a sweep with some of the other similar areas that I'll get to in a future video. We have this setup. This setup is intriguing. I can't speak about it, but for those of you who want to try to guess where I'm going with this, I think this area gets called back into Sekiro. It's going to be fun. I want to get to that, but that unfortunately requires a lot of different features. I have this kind of path, like it's a speed run, but it's a lore run. All right. This area is almost kind of reminiscent of a later bit in On Orlando. And I think I like to imagine I would be less bad at this if I were playing a build and a weapon that I was more familiar with, but hey, just look at that damage. We get our first Titanite shard, we get Alluring Skull. Oh boy. I'm trying to talk about items here, go away. Alright, that should be fine. Alluring Skull, attracts certain type of enemies, hollows are lured by its power. I don't have a lot to say about this right now, but it is something that gets brought back in other games later on that plays more of a clear role. Let's just put it that way. We have our spear guy. And now where I'm going to really regret not being able to do a... Sheesh. Alright, I can't shield that. Like I said, I don't remember this game particularly well. We'll go ahead and Estus, and we will... I mean, it's the Man-Eater boars, right? I should have known better. We have the Armored Pig, peculiar. Just strange. The best way to beat it is to punch the butthole. That I find so hard to do in this game. There we go. We gotta do that, like, what? Once more? It's not so bad. Get a Fangboar Helm. Severed head of the fully armored Fang boar taken by the one who killed it as proof of his victory, just as the gods once did of a head of an ancient dragon. So there's almost a sacrificial ritual being on here, a recreation of primal myth. Can I wear the helm without losing my... That's good enough, I guess. And it'll give us some helm armor. So we'll run with that. Next we have this. An intriguing enemy who just runs away from you to trap you, as I demonstrate. Ah, jeez. How excited I'll be to get back to Bloodborne. I am a bit of a heretic. I absolutely prefer Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 to these older games. I am a sucker for smooth combat design, and this is not... It shows its age. That doesn't mean it's a bad game, but they learned a lot. They learned a lot in this process. So we have this area, almost like a mess hall. What's interesting about that is that you never have anyone in these games eating anything, so it's kind of reminiscent of maybe a previous military structure that now you only see the decay of. Got a mystery key. I do not truthfully recall what the mystery key is for. Oh, no, I remember now. I don't have anything fascinating to say about that. I apologize. Moving on up. Oh, jeez. Dying here would be so depressing. But, again, that's Dark Souls. We have our usual common rampart. Tiptoe. Just a lost soul, nothing that screams any kind of deeper meaning. Like, sometimes you just have to let certain things be as game mechanics rather than anything that is representing a lore. The line between that is challenging, but I am cognizant that it's there. There are limits to my insanity. We have a fog gate. Fog gates are used in these games a lot more for reasons other than foreshadowing boss fights. Sometimes I feel like they represent a sort of time skip in terms of the narrative of what's going on, but that is, shall we say, convoluted. So we have another motif of a undead who is just staring at an item as though they have lost something, lost someone. Oh boy. Oh jeez. Thank you for being so kind. I didn't actually mean to drink there. We have a rapier-wielding enemy. Sometimes in my head that gets attached to Ricard, who has a named rapier of his own. We'll run into that narrative later. The item that's being guarded is a knight's shield, which is something that I think actually gets repeated in Dark Souls 3 in some interesting ways. Medium shield, elegantly carved and painted, thought to have been used by ancient knights of the nobility, but only similar to other shields. If it means anything, my suspicion is that it is hidden somewhere in the visual design rather than the textual narrative. I believe that it will be an upgrade for us in terms of blocking physical damage, so we'll run with it. We have here a spear-wielding enemy guarding some barrels. My. There we go. Sadly low on Estus. But this is the area that will lead to the pig fight, and it's one that we can't go through directly. True to Dark Souls 1, a lot of what goes on in the series is breaking and entering. We have something behind me. I think, similar to the previous enemy we just fought, sort of noteworthy in that it has Estus, right? But I believe its weaponry is longsword. Are they two different... a side sword, actually. Are they two different histories of knights that have come to this area independently? Two rival factions who were trying to come to this area? It's helpful to think in terms like that, because my belief is that what we play through in Dark Souls is not a traditional narrative. Surprise, surprise. It is a abstraction of a story, a history. Similar to how they talk about in other zones, that you're there to imagine the past of these areas, not to directly experience it. You're going through the runes of... we've got a basic battle. I'm not going to bother fighting him right now. This is use of the causeway motif. We will mention that later, but it leads to this building, which is strange. It's not really obviously connected to... oh, Jesus. Just sawed off. That familiar anvil. And a welcoming bonfire. I can't even remember what faith you want for the first miracle. So, we've got first here Andre of Astora. I'm not going to say a lot about him, but he means more to this series than I've actually been able to puzzle out. He is your first...
Well, I'm Andre of Astora.
No, just be quiet.
If you require smithing, then speak to me.
Here we can first boost our weapons. Why not? It's thematic. We can learn a gesture. And we can talk. We have other alternatives. Purchasing items if you want to try to grind to improve your weaponry just through Titanite Shard purchases. We have the Crest Artorias. That will be something we'll talk about later. Some other tools that not especially important. A selection of weapons that may or may not mean something. I'm not going to dwell on that. And basic ranged weapon ammo. So we'll talk a little bit.
Most weapons and armor are mighty sturdy indeed.
Very tutorial.
Every ounce of metal has its breaking point. If you notice durability running low, it's time to repair. You can ask a blacksmith like myself, or do it on your own with a grindstone. The nice thing about weapons, they never betray you. So pay them a little respect.
Betrayal, huh? Can we repair? A little bit. Why not? Anything else?
There are two types of weapon forging. There's reinforcement and there's ascension. Reinforcement is simple. It strengthens the weapon and nothing more. A simple task for any blacksmith. Hell, you could even do it yourself with a smith box. But ascension's a finer art. It alters a weapon's properties. Ascension is the territory of we blacksmiths. A smith box just won't do the trick. Start out with reinforcement. When that loses its charm, you can consider ascension. As you've noticed, this land is flush with the mad and wicked. You won't make it through the night without employing my services.
Very tutorial text. I don't remember if there's anything later on that is interesting. But we'll refer more to him in a little bit. First we have, in this area on the bottom floor, this Titanite demon, who we will not be fighting right now, but this leads to Darkroot Garden. We have a floor above that leads us to Sen's Fortress. And we have the final floor that is where we came from, that goes to the Undead Parish. In my head, and this is actually going to be quite a stretch, I don't 100% believe it myself, this is sort of meant to represent an artificial tree. A mythological tree that connects 3 different worlds: the underworld, Earth, and the heavens. Then Astora's, well, Andre's presence here serves as somewhat of a root keeper. It's an idea that I'm playing with. I don't know if I'm going to keep it or not, but that's how you have to do these things. You just toy with a connection until it either pans out or it gets discarded. But I want to go to Sen's Fortress, because here we meet our second perspective manager. The causeway imagery again.
Oh, forgive me. I was absorbed in thought. I am Siegmeyer of Katarina. Quite honestly, I've run flat up against a wall, or a gate, I should say. The thing just won't budge, no matter how long I wait. And oh, have I waited. So here I sit, in quite a pickle, weighing my options, so to speak. Still closed. Still closed.
This is Siegmeyer. I consider him the sort of alternative to Solaire in this game. They both have extensive quest lines that are not especially obvious, and both kind of tend to end in tragedy no matter what branch you take. But there is there's a mirroring to them, where Solaire is confident, Siegmeyer is not. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's very clear about not knowing what he's doing. Where Solaire doesn't ask for help, Siegmeyer asks for help all the time. In fact, almost every single step of his quest line is requesting help. I kind of see him as a manager of a project that has gone to a point where he doesn't have a conception of what to even do now, where he feels useless. He's just desperately hoping that his team can pull through. And it is, true to a management cycle that sometimes things escape you. And how you learn from that, how you deal with that, is an important part of just working with other human beings. Not even in management like a capitalistic sense, but, just day-to-day life. So I think with that, I will call this section of Dark Souls. I have enough to talk about for Dark Souls 1. I've completed the Solaire Siegmeyer introductory comparison. And next segment will be one of the more iconic initial bosses and the Bell of Awakening. So thanks again for watching, and stay tuned in the near future for some Dark Souls 3, because, as I said, we're jumping around.